Hi guys, how you doing? Prior to the launch of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, I put out a video in which I attempted to show that without DLSS, or an older GPU can be as good, if not better, than a new GPU in terms of raw performance, and that you'd be much better served upgrading your CPU and RAM. Now, I focused in that video on Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 primarily because it's a well-known demanding title where the debate between 30 and 60 frames per second has been well known and well documented for a long time. Now, unfortunately, it seems I didn't do a particularly good job at highlighting that point, because a lot of people have come back to me arguing their perspective, which after discussion usually transpires to be exactly the same as mine. And the RTX 50 series has sold out across the board on day one, so I clearly didn't do a good job of stopping that from happening, unless Nvidia is playing silly buggers and deliberately keeping stock levels really low to make their product look more popular than it really is. Perhaps there's another example of greedy resellers. I know that a lot of people on eBay have created anti-scalp bot pages where they're trying to eliminate scalpers and so on and so forth, but I personally think it's Nvidia who have either deliberately reduced the amount of stock, or perhaps they have convinced the wealthy that spending between £2,000 and £4,000 on a graphics card is actually a cost-effective thing. Perhaps they've tricked them all with the frames per second claims that they've been making of late. So, now that we do have the 50 series out in the world, you won't be surprised to hear that Nvidia have not sent me a card to test anything on. And we've also got the next generation of DLSS version 4, which I spoke about briefly in my last video, and it's worth clarifying, I think, my position on that, because I have some recommendations for you and I want to explain why I'm making those recommendations. Having read all of the Nvidia blurb, or rhetoric as I prefer to call it, I would actually still maintain that you don't waste your money on a 50 series GPU or even a 40 series GPU right now. Instead, just upgrade your CPU and RAM to be the best that you can afford, and I'll explain exactly why that is. But before I do that, the important thing here is that you make a decision. Now, this is really important, okay? Are you playing on a monitor that only plays 1080p or 2K or 4K? Is that what you want to play on? And if that's what you want to play on, do you demand 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, or 120 frames per second, or more? It doesn't matter. What you need to do is you need to identify what your absolute minimum frames per second and resolution is going to be for your favorite game and your most demanding games as well, and then work towards that. I guarantee you that the chances are that your CPU will bottleneck your GPU way before your GPU needs replacing, regardless of what Nvidia try and convince you of. And anyone out there who's pushing Nvidia content, I really think you should start questioning these people and start finding more honest reviewers, because we are out there. I have seen a couple of other people trying to do the same thing that I'm doing, and it's really important that you don't get swept up in all the rhetoric of these marketing campaigns. So I would say anyone that refers to DLSS as a single entity should be immediately dismissed and ignored, because DLSS is actually way more than just one thing. At the very least, it is 4 very distinctly different things, and they will mean very different things to different players and different games. Not all games are going to benefit in the same way, and some games will benefit more than others. So it's really important that you sort of fill in the gaps here and make sure that you can take what I'm saying and use it for your particular example. So the 4 things are multi-frame generation, enhanced DLSS frame generation, DLSS array reconstruction, DLSS super resolution, which is in beta at the moment, and dlaa deep learning anti-aliasing. Now, if you're more than 50% awake and you're paying attention, you may have noticed that was 5 things. But in reality, and I'm not kidding here, multi-frame generation and frame generation are essentially the same thing. And whilst only the 50 series cards have access to multi-frame generation, I believe there's already a potential hack out there in order to force any DLSS capable game to force multi-frame generation, irrespective of which card version you're using. As long as you're using version 20 series or above Nvidia cards, that should be available to you. Now, let me be clear about frame generation. It's nothing more than the AI guessing what the next frame should be. It's not in any way performance enhancing, like NVIDIA claim it is. It's guesswork. If the AI frame generator guesses that you're going to turn your head to the left and you actually turn your head to the right in the game, there's going to be a discrepancy, and there will always be a discrepancy. So who wants 1, 2, or even 3 extra frames thrown into their game if those frames don't even accurately represent what you, the player, is asking the game to do? I certainly don't, and I certainly don't if it means using more power, creating more heat, and basically overall reduce the life expectancy of my PC. So if you're not familiar with what frame generation is, if you've got frame A and frame B, and that's your gameplay, what they've done is they've been able to introduce a frame in between A and B, generated by the AI. Now, the AI doesn't know what frame B is going to be, it only knows what frame A was, and it uses that to anticipate what frame B is going to be. Now, the thing is, they can create that frame so quickly that they've been able to squeeze 3 of these fake frames in between A and B. So all this is doing is increasing the chances of it being an incorrect frame. Perhaps that's going to introduce ghosting. It's certainly going to introduce latency. Now, in DLSS 3 and 3.5, the input lag was horrendous because of these AI generated frames, because those AI generated frames cannot interpret or listen to your inputs at all. So if you're on an AI generated frame and you move, the game doesn't respond to that at all. So it still chucks out B as if it were A, so to speak. So then you get this horrible lag. Now, they said in DLSS 4 they would fix this and it wouldn't be a problem anymore. I haven't got a 50 series card to test it out, so I don't know whether they have or not. But my suspicion is that it doesn't matter, to be perfectly honest with you, because it's still guessing. It's still guesswork. At the end of the day, it's guesswork. It's never going to be 100% accurate. And the only way it can be accurate 100% is if the AI takes over your inputs and starts playing the game for you, a bit like FIFA started to do. In an attempt to make their animations more fluid, they discovered that their animations, once an animation had started, they couldn't stop it just because you, the player, wanted to turn the other way. So in order to make their game look better, they just took over. So if you've gone left and it started an animation and then you decide to go right, it just ignores you and does what it wants to finish the animation to make it look smoother. That is input lag. The game is not doing what I want it to do. The game is doing what it wants to do to make itself look or appear to be better than it actually is. That is frame generation in a nutshell. At best, it seems to me at least that buying a 50 series card is going to introduce a lot of power overheads for something which ultimately equates to input lag. Now, I don't know if I coined the phrase or not, but I call them fake frames because they really are. And to be 100% clear, the actual card performance capability has not increased anywhere near as much as they're suggesting. They're trying to trick you into thinking it's 2 times faster or 3 times faster or even 4 times faster in certain games, but it really isn't. These are fake frames. The actual core benefit is somewhere between 10 and 30%. And if you think £2,000 to £4,000 is money well spent to get sort of 10 to 30% more frames per second, just start sending money my way. Seriously, because you've got more money than you know what to do with. Now, for some reason, somehow NVIDIA have been really good at convincing mostly young people that the higher frames you get, the better the gameplay experience is. Okay? And this just isn't true. Not if it's introducing lag, at least. And I would say in the same way that better graphics. Do you remember when games graphics were getting better and better and better, but the gameplay was getting worse and worse and worse? Well, Minecraft, perfect example of, a wake-up call. Minecraft, terrible graphics, wonderful gameplay, one of the most popular games of all time. So think about this one single question. If the 50 series cards really are the very best of the best cards that have ever been created, then why do we even need DLSS? Why do we need these AI generated frames? Why can't they just outperform all the 40 series cards and everything with all the DLSS stuff turned off? Like I say, 30% max for a couple of £1,000 just does not seem cost effective to me, especially when the RTX 4090 is perfectly capable of running 4K. And you know, a lot of games right now don't even support DLSS 4, so you're limiting yourself. You're buying something that really has no real dynamic benefit for you. And if you do get a 50 series card, you're probably going to have to upgrade your power, your PSU, and your cooling system, because they get really hot, these 50 series cards. You know, and that's using a lot more electricity for just a very small amount of actual real terms percentage performance improvements. Okay, so that's reason one why I say don't bother buying a brand new GPU. Upgrade your CPU and your RAM first. Now let's discuss reason number two: DLSS ray reconstruction. Okay, ray reconstruction is an AI powered feature that improves the quality of ray traced images in games and apps. It replaces existing denoisers. Now, denoisers, if you literally break it down as denoisers, basically means going around tidying up blurry rendered images. With AI generated pixels, by analysing the data from the previous frame, it then clears up the artifacts to create a clearer image. You get less of these blurry sort of frames that don't look right, you know, just sort of stretch and just look awful. You'll have less of those. That's what this thing does. Now, it can recognize lighting patterns such as reflections, ambient occlusion, global illumination, and it aims to improve the look of ray trace lighting and reflection effects, whilst also reducing the performance cost of these effects, which reduces motion blur, which is interesting because that's something that, you know, game developers started introducing a while back to cover the fact that the frames were not very smooth, and we all hate it and we all turn it off. So yeah, it's meant to reduce motion blur, and it makes path trace reflections more accurate and sharper. The best way to compare this, if you want to see how well it's working in your game, is to go and look at water reflections, or how ambient light spills out onto other buildings and so on. Try and find a super demanding game. Now, when Cyberpunk 2077 came out, you know, it got a lot of negative reviews and so on, unjustly, I think, but they must be so proud of the fact that if anyone ever wants to push a GPU to its limits and really see what it's capable of, that tends to be the game they go to. So kudos to Cyberpunk 2077 for that. So you're going to look at me and you're going to say, but that all sounds amazing, Mr. Sin. Why wouldn't I want that? And my answer to you is, you do want that. You absolutely do want that. And you're probably going to benefit from that feature. Pretty much all of us could benefit from that feature. But trust me, when I say, this is important. There's two things I want to say here. I used to live 5 feet away from a train track, and it was a very busy train track, and as the trains went past, it would make the house shake. Now, I hated that. It was really annoying for about 2 weeks. Then I stopped noticing it, and then I didn't notice it at all. Equally, I used to live right on the top of the cliffs looking out over the sea, and for the first couple of months I was like, oh my god, this is the most beautiful place in the world. I am one very lucky man. Look how close I am to the beach. This is wonderful. My life feels complete. Within a couple of months, you know, I get up, I get dressed, have my breakfast, go to work. I don't even look at the sea. I don't even think about the sand. You know, it's funny. If you're really looking for these things, then yes, they stand out. And yes, you could be wowed and amazed by them. But essentially, if your game's running smooth and you've got the nice resolution and the game is fun to play, you stop noticing these things really, really quickly. Not to mention the fact, and this is the real kicker why I say don't buy a new GPU, as long as you have a Series 2 NVIDIA card or above, you are going to get this feature anyway. So that's it. The only reason I recommend you buy a new GPU is if you're playing on anything under a 2 series. Right, there are other things to discuss. If I haven't convinced you already, wow, I don't know what to say to you. Let's talk about super resolution. Reason number 3. Unlike frame generation, which I absolutely despise, super resolution, SR, also known as upscaling, can potentially be very useful indeed. 4K is insurmountably nicer to look at than 1080p, but it's also far more resource hungry. So for me, genuinely, I would say that 2K is kind of the best of both worlds. Unless you've got a system that runs 4K without even blinking, then just try and aim for 2K, because 2K, in my humble opinion, looks just like 4K. Do you know what I mean? 1080p looks very, very dated and very, you know, the resolution isn't great, nothing looks sharp, it's not nice to look at. 2K, on the other hand, looks very fresh and very modern. 4K is just showing off, really. That's what we've got here. So this is where super resolution comes in. Let's take a static image, a photograph, a picture that somebody's drawn. Now, if we let the AI add empty pixels in there, so they're blank, but make the picture bigger, increasing the resolution, and then it fills in each of those pixels based on the relationship between the pixels that surround it. So here you've got black, and here you've got white, somewhere in the middle, you're going to have grey. Now that's really simple. That is not like frame generation, it's not guesswork. That's saying, I know what's on the left, I know what's on the right, I know what's above me, I know what's below me, I know what my diagonals are, and I can work out from all of those inputs what the middle pixel should be. So normally, 99.9% of the time, the AI creation is going to be a very close fit, and it's going to look really good. So when you upscale an image like that, a static image, it's normally bloody perfect these days. Really excellent quality. So essentially, that's the same thing that happens when you're using super resolution, or SR, in a game. So if you're playing at 1080p, that image can be scaled up at a fraction of the usual frames per second cost. So in essence, you're going to get a much nicer visual performance, but it's not going to cost you as many frames per second that it would do if you would just set it to 4K. But here's the kicker, it's not quite as good as 4K. So whilst it uses less overheads, it's not actually as good as 4K. So it's like 4K toned down a bit. So it's going to look a lot nicer than 1080p, but it's not going to look quite as good as 4K. So as I mentioned before, I think 2K is the best place to be. And with SR, it really could be the best of both worlds, because you start off with a much cleaner, much tidier looking image anyway, and if you do want to upscale it to 4K, then it's got less work to do, so you're losing even less frames per second, and you're going to get a much better overall picture anyway. So yes, potentially this is a good feature, but again, why buy a 50 series GPU when this feature is going to be on all cards, Nvidia cards, Series 2 and above? So as long as you've got a Series 2 card or above, this feature should be available to you. You can spend £2,000 on a 50 series card, or you can spend £200 on a 2080 or a 2090 and get all of these great new performance enhancing features. If you're happy with 60 frames per second, and that card can pull 50 to 60 frames per second in the resolution that you've chosen, that's the key thing, then why spend all the extra money? Put it into your CPU, because I tell you what, that's where the benefit will be. So, my final point of argument, dlaa. Now, dlaa is something that I don't besmirch at all. I'm actually really impressed with it. This is, I think, the most important thing, or the most impressive thing from the DLSS 4.0 range. In fact, from the entire DLSS range, it's the most important thing. It's the most exciting thing that I've seen personally. So it's designed to improve image quality without sacrificing performance, whilst retaining the same resolution that you've set. So it's not an upscaler, but it just gives an overall improvement to visual clarity with minimal FPS loss. It's not perfect. It's a work in progress still. To be clear, dlaa is designed to improve the image quality for a very small amount of performance loss, whereas dlss, that's the deep learning super sampling, uses AI to increase performance by rendering frames at lower resolutions and then upscaling them. DLSS is designed to increase performance, give you more frames per second, but in doing that you will lose quality. You've also got TAA, which is temporal anti-aliasing, and that's also very good, and it was always the go-to for the longest time that I can remember. But TAA is a spatial anti-aliasing technique that uses the past frame data, but DLAA apparently is better than TAA at handling small meshes flickering and shimmering. So you know when you're walking through an area and there's lots of lights and there's lots of reflections and shimmers and stuff, and some of the ground textures or some of the intricate details, they're just not quite right. They're like tweaking and twitching and shivering and shaking. Well, DLAA is supposed to be better at at stopping that from occurring than TAA is. And it's still an early technology, so it's going to get better and better. And again, it's available to all NVIDIA Series 2 GPUs and above. So listen, I don't think I can break it down and explain it any more simply than that. If you've got any questions, please ask. But fundamentally, what I'm saying to you is, as long as you've got an NVIDIA Series 2, Series 20, I don't know how you're supposed to say that, like a 2080, 2090, that kind of card. As long as you've got something in that region, I've got a 3080, I've got a 4070 Ti, I've got a 4090. All of these cards, all three of these cards will have all of these features, and possibly even multi, what do they call it? MSR, MFG, multi-frame generation, they call it. But I don't want multi-frame generation. I don't even want frame generation. I don't want fake frames in my game. It's a false commodity. But now, here's another thing. There's another thing that NVIDIA have brought out, which is quite interesting. But I don't know enough about it to talk about it much yet. But I'll just mention it very briefly. NVIDIA's Reflex low latency. Now, I believe there's an NVIDIA Reflex 2 coming out as part of DLSS 4.0. And I've heard good things about it. An NVIDIA Reflex 2 is, I think, supposed to work in conjunction with MFG. So whilst it's generating frames and you move the opposite way to what the generated frames that think you're going, it's supposed to be able to take certain elements of that screen, that image, that frame, and move them the way that you're going. In essence, removing that latency that exists. Sounds a bit space agey to me. It's an interesting concept. If it works, then maybe multi-frame generation becomes a viable thing. But it for me, it just feels a little bit too close to the computers playing the game for you, like auto aim, that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I thought I'd throw that in there because it is a valid argument. It is a valid counter argument, but I just don't know enough about it yet. I haven't tried it out. But anyway, I hope that is useful for you. I hope it's informative. I hope somewhere along the lines that helps you out. But I really appreciate you watching. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. Let me know what you're doing. Are you upgrading your CPU, your RAM, or are you going to buy a GPU? Have you already bought a 50 series card? What do you think of it? And how much did you pay for that? Anyway, yeah, that's all from me. I'm just here trying to make things clear for you and trying to help you guys out. That's all I'm here for. I'm not here to make NVIDIA more money than they've already got. I think they've got plenty. I'm here to try and protect you against these big companies that just take you for granted. I hate seeing it, and I just try and clarify the situation as I see it, as honestly as I can, and hopefully that enables you to make better decisions in the future. Any questions, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, take care, goodbye for now.